Right, hi everyone. We are here this afternoon to do our panel Multiple Murder. Does the genre choose the author or can the author call the shots? And I'm Michelle Davies, and I'm here with Roz Watkins and Marnie Riches. And I think we're going to start by sort of each of us going around and introducing ourselves and saying what our publishing journey has been so far. So Marnie, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. Well, I actually started off writing for children. So back in 2012, or was it 13, I had a series of 6 historical adventures published by HarperCollins Children's for 7+-year-olds. So that's how I got my foot in the door. It was under a pseudonym called Chris Blake. But at the time, I'd been writing my first thriller because I decided I was too dark and sweary in my tastes to stick with children's fiction. But The Girl Who Wouldn't Die, which was my debut in my George Mackenzie series about a criminologist that works with the Dutch police, that didn't actually get published till 2015. So I've had in total 9 crime thrillers published. I'm now with Orion. My latest 2 were Tightrope and Backlash about the PI Bev Saunders. So a lot of what I write now is based up north, and I'm just about to have a historical saga published under the pseudonym Maggie Campbell, and that's about the birth of the NHS in 1948. That's me.
Roz, wow. What about you?
Much newer to it than Marnie. So my first book, I write a series of crime novels set in the Peak District, which is basically where I live. So it was just kind of lazy choice of setting. And the first one came out a couple of years ago. So the Devil's Dice was the first one, and then Dead Man's Daughter last year, and yesterday the third one, which is Cut to the Bone.
Happy book
Thank you. Yeah, so sort of all still feels fairly new to me, really. I am exploring, as we're going to talk about, something in a slightly different genre at the moment.
Well, my journey to publication started in 2016. I've written a detective series featuring a family liaison officer in the main character. My first one, Gone Astray, came out in 2016, and then I've had one a year since then. So last year was the 4th one, Dead Guilty. And I have since moved publishers, and I'm now with Orion as well as Marnie. And my first psychological thriller is coming out in November with them, called Shadow of a Doubt. So really, I guess what we need to discuss is what we're doing now is how different to what it is we've just done already. So, I mean, with me, I did a police procedural, and I'm making a jump to a psychological thriller, which I think, compared to perhaps what you're doing, Marnie, because you're making the jump to a historical fiction, which I'm totally in awe of, because I read historical fiction.
It's not a jump as such. It's not a jump as such. It's a side project.
Yeah.
But within the crime genre, I've got a novel that's just going out on Sub, which is quite different from what I've done before, and which I wrote just after the historical saga. So again, that's kind of a within genre jump. Can't speak.
Can you say what it's about?
It's a serial killer thriller, but it's set in it's a speculative thriller. So it's set 20 years in the future.
Oh,
so it's in a post-Brexit, post-pandemic Britain.
Wow. You've got the pandemic in it then, have you?
It's only touched upon because I was writing the last third when coronavirus started to get really big, and I thought, well, in 20 years' time, actually, it could end up just a bit of a footnote of that happened in 2020. So I thought that it would have an impact like SARS has done in the Far East, where you do get some people wear masks because they've had family members die, but it's not kind of an all-encompassing problem. I think that the economic ramifications will end up far reaching into the future than anything else, actually. So it'd be broken Britain par excellence in 20 years' time because of environmental and economic concerns.
I suppose at least setting it in 20 years' time, you can choose, you can make it up, can't you? Whereas setting it like next year or the year, my next one will be set, it'll come out in 2022, and I was going to set it in 2022, but it's like I've got no clue whether I mean, like, Michelle, are you including the pandemic in your sort of?
Well, the one that's it's set in 2019, and I haven't had to worry about that. But the one that I'm writing at the moment, so it's the second psychological thriller, is coming out in 2021. So I was going to set it in 2021, but now I'm just not sure. It's a conversation I kind of think I need to write it. I have alluded to it, but of course we just don't know next year how much we'll still be feeling that impact. So Roz, what can you tell us about yours? Because is it still official? Has it been announced yet? Or?
It hasn't been announced. So I had to have a little chat with my publisher about whether it was okay to talk about it. And they sort of said, yes, it is this. But yeah, I've not really told anyone. So it counts as a psychological thriller. And the premise is basically that a teenage boy inexplicably kills both his parents and then drives off at night, but gets involved in a car crash and ends up in a coma / vegetative state. And that happened 20 years ago, and he's basically been in a vegetative state ever since. But it appears that he may be conscious and he may be able to communicate. And it's really about the effect on his sister and sort of what happens. So it's set in the present day, but the massacre happened 20 years ago. And I just wanted to write it from the point of view of the sister and him. So it didn't fit within the police procedural thing. So I could have written something like that, but I would have had to have had my main character investigating it. And I really wanted to get inside the head of the sister, and also the character who's sort of not in a vegetative state, even though we think he is.
That's brilliant.
So it's a bit different, but it's not different enough that my publisher they do tend to reject things. Like I sometimes like the idea of getting a bit speculative or a bit weird, and they tend to sort of say, no, it needs to be kind of still within mainstream crime, but they're okay with this. So that's the plan.
I mean, that's what
I think that's the problem, is that you often get an editor that has a certain vision for your writing, and you end up shunted down a path that you don't necessarily want to go down. I mean, I started out writing about serial killers with my criminologist series, the George Mackenzie series, and I always wanted to kind of write about that, bringing up different themes and stuff like trafficking and sexism and racism. But then I found I was kind of shunted down the path of writing gangland thrillers about Manchester, which was great fun to do, but that's not something that I had planned for me. And I was writing PI thrillers, which again, really good fun, really interesting. But I think I've written this novel out of contract to claw back some control, actually, and have gone back to a serial killer thriller. So it might be set in a different time, but it is still, the premise is, how do you catch a killer in a world full of murder? So, but that was, I don't know if it will succeed or not, but I think that you do have to call the shots. You do have to exert yourself, unless you want to be pigeonholed into...
Oh, we're slightly losing you, Marnie. Do you want to say that?
What an editor thinks.
Do you want to say that? Do you want to say that again? Because you cut out a bit.
Are you losing me?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
Just slow down. Just say that answer. Just say that again. So you were writing gangland thrillers, and you found yourself going down this cul-de-sac of writing these. So that's why you decided to do something else.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always wanted to write serial killer thrillers, and just ended up constantly, you know, you kind of write what you're commissioned to write, and I didn't feel that I necessarily wanted to do that longer term. So I've written this out of contract.
Yeah.
And, you know, the premise is, how do you find a killer in a world full of murder? You know, and I don't know if it will succeed, but that feels very much more what I wanted to write.
Yeah, it sounds great. I think you're right about calling the shots. With me, it was, I had just delivered, or I was about to deliver the 4th book in my series, and I was already starting to think, oh, have I got another one in me? And I remember going, because I live in London, I think much to my agent's annoyance, I can pop in to see her quite easily. So I went in I said, can I come in and see you? And I said, I feel like I want to take control of my career, and I don't know if I want to carry on with the series just now. And she said, well, what do you want to write? And at that point I think it was that was in the August, and in the April I'd been listening to, you know, on Radio 4, the Sue McGregor reunion show. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, where there's a big story in the news and they get loads of all the participants back to sit around the table and talk about what it was like. So they've had things like from the miners' strike, you know, death of Diana, things like that. And then I was listening to this one day, and it was the Enfield haunting, which is actually not far from where I live. And it was all the participants, apart from the 2 girls at the centre of it, Margaret and Janet Hodgson. And it just got me thinking, you know, what it would be like to be part of something like this big paranormal thing that everyone was talking about in the papers. It was like in the papers every day for about 18 months. And that sort of sparked the idea. So I said to my agent, this is what I want to write. And she was just, go and do it, because she said, I can tell from you talking about it, that's the book you need to write next. So we parked the series, and you know, Orion bought it, and that's great. So I'm really glad, but I think that I pushed myself to do it.
I think you do have to take risks.
Yeah. So
I'm just going to change my internet source. Hang on a minute.
Okay.
I'm just going to, because I'm on my extender at the moment. It's shit. Hang on. Back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right, okay, we'll see if that's any better. Sorry.
So have you found that it's changed the way you write, you know, doing these new books, sort of writing a new genre within the genre? Has it changed how because for me, I had never, part of the reason I've never tried a psychological thriller before was because I'd always written in the 3rd person. And I must admit, when I started writing in the 1st person, I found it quite hard at first, you know, that because I'm so used to sort of falling back on the police procedural to kind of explain stuff, and it all obviously had to come out of this 1st person character. What about you guys?
My police procedurals were in the 1st person, so that wasn't an issue at all. But it is really different, isn't it? Right? Yeah. I think the police procedure gives you a really clear framework, doesn't it, for how the book goes, the investigation. And I found that was quite good for my early books, because you sort of it gives you a structure. But I was beginning to feel a little bit like it's hard to make the main character have a big emotional journey each time, I think, with a police procedural, you know, because they're the police. And I sort of made my first 3 very, very personal for my main character, but then starts to get to a point where you think, is that going to happen again and again? So I've actually quite enjoyed being able to write from the point of view of the person who's really, really affected by the crime, as opposed to the cop.
Yeah.
And also, don't know about you, but it's such a relief not to have to worry about all the police procedure, because
I've always been really lazy, because my first 5 books, the George Mackenzie ones, she worked with the Dutch police, but of course, you know, your average British reader isn't going to know their procedure at all. And she's a criminologist, so she gets to do what the hell she likes. And it's the same with the PI Bev Saunders for the books that I've done for Orion. But you're right what you say. When I was doing Born Bad and the cover up my Manchester Gangland books, suddenly I didn't have that procedural framework. as narrative structure. And I had to think, Jesus, how am I going to write this? Because I always write in close third person narrative voice, unless I'm doing something like women's fiction or I wrote a woman's humorous novel that didn't get placed, and I'm currently writing a memoir that's all first person, but for my crime I always use close third person. But I found when I was doing the gangland thriller, because you haven't got a crime to solve, actually it's more like a saga. So now that I have done a historical saga under contract, that's much more that kind of fluid, storytelling.
Did you find it? Did it change how you had to research? Because I've always thought if you to write historical crime, you have to go back and do loads and loads of research as well. Or did you find you could approach it in the same way, sort of take the kernel of what the story was and then not worry so much about it?
Oh, historical takes such a lot of research. I mean, the one that I've got coming out in ebook on the 5th of July, and the paperback comes out in September, it's Nurse Kitty's Secret War. And it took me a lot longer. It took me twice as long to write because I had to get all the detail right, and a lot of the historical events and the way people live will inform the action. So you can't have them going off and doing what you would like them to do. They kind of, they do what they want to do according to the era that they lived in and the constraints that they were under. So I'm talking about, a kind of poor working class nurse trying to make her way in, what is now Trafford General Hospital.
Okay.
With all the kind of snobbery and the kind of post-war suffering and poverty, the poverty and the kind of God, I can't think. It's a good job Douglas is going to edit. But, no, it's really hard. It's a lot harder. And when I was doing the George Mackenzie stuff, that required an awful lot of research because it was serial killers. So you had to research the kind of medical way in which people were killed and the post-mortem stuff and all the foreign stuff set in the Netherlands and all the trafficking stuff for the themes. But with the gangland sagas and the PI stuff that I've been writing for Orion, there's hardly any research at all. It just all comes out my head.
I mean, with my series, I was very lucky that the former head of family liaison for the country was my contact. So I always had him to fall back on, if I needed to know something. So like you say, it's that it provided that structure, but with the psychological thriller, it was just me in my head and getting into this character's head. I ended up ironically giving myself some structure that I've interspersed my chapters with news reports and like Twitter feeds and things like that, which I found really helped me break up the voice a bit because I just was not used to writing 90,000 words in one voice. So
it's just one point of view.
Yeah, that for me was the biggest challenge. And actually it fits with the story to bring in sort of news reports and things like that. I think that was definitely the biggest challenge. There wasn't any point where I thought, what am I doing? I need to go back and write another detective novel. Did you ever feel like that? Did you ever get halfway through and think, oh, I should carry on doing what I'm doing? Or was it just that, actually this is the book I need to write?
I mean, I've only just started really writing the non-detective one, but I kind of never really deliberately wrote a detective novel in the first place. So it was sort of
yours have all got a supernatural theme running through them, haven't they?
Which
abandoned now.
Standalone won't have so much, but I do like the kind of weird stuff, and I never really meant it to be a detective. It just sort of happened that when she kind of looped onto the scene, she just took over. So I've always found the detective side of it quite tricky. I've got lovely police contacts, and I sort of used to go around their place, and they, we'd drink loads, and they'd tell me why it was all completely unfeasible the way I'd done it. And
it's great when they do that.
I know. Problem is, you can't make it realistic, can you? So I don't know about you, but that used to sort of stress me out quite a bit. I know really you'd have like 100 people in a room looking at number plate data, and I wanted, sort of a small team of 3 or 4 people to solve this multiple murder, and you just know that it wouldn't work like that at all, but you have to pretend. And I was sort of in a low level of stress the whole time about that, kind of apologising to my police contacts that actually I know this is just completely not how you told me it was going to work, but it has to be like this to make it readable. So I found it a relief not to be doing that, actually.
I think the point is that not everyone's a policeman. You know what I mean?
They don't care, do they? Even the cops don't care. You know, they don't care that it's not accurate.
It's fiction, isn't it? It's like, that's the beauty of writing something in the far future, is that it is totally freeing. I don't know whether it'll get a deal or not, but I'm able to construct a Britain and a police service and, you know, a criminality that I see fit. It's my vision. It's like my 1984.
That must be so freeing. I mean, I'm writing the second psychological thriller, which is also kind of inspired by real events. I definitely found more freedom this time. I feel like my confidence has grown, and you know, and I think, yeah, I've got this now. I can do it. But I'd love to do a historical fiction, but I just, you know, like you say, the research is really daunting. To get it right, you read books like Laura Shepherd Robinson's Blood and Sugar, and you just think, wow, she's really dug deep on this one.
Well, I've just read her latest, Daughters of Night, and it was absolutely amazing. It was even better than Blood and Sugar, but the amount of research, and it's taken her 2 years to write, and I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Did you? I mean, my agent was brilliant. She was completely on board. She said, yeah, we'll just do something, you know, go and do something different, you know, try and write this book. Did you have to persuade your agents to get on board with, you know?
My agent, no, I mean, well, I've been commissioned to write things, so that's slightly different. Apart from this one that's going out of contract on spec.
That's the one then, because obviously it sounds really different to what you've done. So
oh right, well we sat down at Harrogate last year and we went to the pub and we spent a couple of hours discussing, you know, what was the way forward for my crime writing, because I already had the deal for Tightrope and Backlash, you know, the Bev Saunders stuff, and I already had the deal as Maggie Campbell to write Nurse Kitty for 3 books. But I said, look, you know, I don't feel like I'm being true to my particular taste and interest, and that when I was writing the George Mackenzie series, which were by far my most successful books, that was what I was interested in. That was what I wanted to write. That did come out of my head. So I feel like I've gone too far down the road of being commissioned to write a certain thing. So you're more like a jobbing writer than an author. And I felt like I'd lost some creative control, and it wasn't necessarily reflecting huge sales. So he was like, yeah, absolutely. And we had a little tete-a-tete about whether I'd go out on a partial or a synopsis or a full novel. And as I said, I made the case for writing a full novel. And then it took us 2 months to devise a synopsis together.
Yeah.
So it was mainly my ideas, but I said, well, you've got to be happy with this because you're going to have to sell this. You're going to have to get behind it, and you know the market. So it did take a lot of back and forth just on the synopsis, and then we've gone through a couple of drafts on the manuscript itself. So it's been a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
But I think that I believe in him and his ability to place it and know the market and the right editors to take it to. And he believes in me, and he completely gets my writing and respects me as a kind of hard-working author. So I think we'll just suck it and see with this one.
It sounds brilliant. I can't wait.
Mine's been...
Go on, Roz.
Oh, what was that, Roz?
I think I lost you. Am I back?
You're back, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, mine's been sort of collaborative with my editor and my agent, really, because I'd already got a deal for another 3 books in the Meg Dalton series. So this one is like a separate thing from that. But my editor, oh, hang on.
Oh, no, they've removed.
It's been upgraded.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I do have to do the school run though at 3. That's the only problem. but sorry, Douglas, please edit that out. But it's actually only 2:30 anyway, so we're fine.
Yeah, we've got 25 till 3. So, yeah, so this has been a sort of separate discussion, but I've been sort of talking to my agent and my editor really about how to kind of make it something that they feel that the HQ feel they can sell. So that's been quite good, really. So we've done the deal for it, but it feels fairly, we haven't got a title or anything, but they kind of want a title and a pitch so that my editor can talk to salespeople about it. So it's quite nice that they're behind it. But yeah, it also means I do feel like I got to be influenced by their views on what's commercial as well. So I'm not completely free to sort of just write something. Like I'd quite like to write a near future thing, a sort of Black Mirror-y type thing, but it's like, no, that's too different. So I am slightly.
It's highly likely that I won't be able to get a deal for this book because it is a bit too out there, in which case, you know, the standard model is to find, you know, to go back to your editor or find a new editor that you want to work with, and they will, you know, in past editors at Avon and at Trapeze have suggested, well, would you like to write this because we've got a gap on our list for this and we think that will sell, and then you them with a story idea in that subgenre. But it does feel much more, when you do that, you feel much more like a jobbing writer rather than an author.
I mean, with my situation was I sold my cycle. I was really nervous sending it out, especially because we sent it out on a partial as well. And my series, you know, while well received and got good reviews, hadn't sold as well as I'd hoped. So I had that issue of, do I send it out in my real name, or, you know, that whole thing of when you know, often authors have to reinvent themselves by changing their names. But and actually we sent it out in a partial, and that's what Orion bought it on, and that was really good because actually then I could work with the editor on finishing the manuscript. And they didn't want me to, they haven't wanted me to change my name, but I imagine if I did write something like historical fiction, like you have, Marnie, I would probably, you know, start afresh with a new moniker then.
Yeah.
Was that something you were asked to do, or was that your...
Yeah, well, to be honest, I wasn't going to come out the closet at all as Maggie Campbell. I think my editor at Trapeze, Sam Eads, it was, you know, she suggested it was hush hush. I mean, I'd said to her, you know, if you ever get any kind of opportunity for me to write such and such, I'm your woman, you know. And it kind of grew from there, and I came up with a synopsis and 3 chapters, and it passed acquisitions, and, you know, it was an absolute joy to write. But I was very happy. It even says copyright Maggie Campbell, and it's only very recently that Sam has said, oh, to hell with it, you might as well just come out as Maggie Campbell, because I suppose she feels that it's easier when I can help promote it, whereas if I'm top secret Maggie Campbell, 70-odd-year-old writer, you know, who I've invented this kind of biog for.
What were her hobbies again?
I can't help promote that.
Hasn't she got brilliant hobbies, or what are her hobbies?
Yeah, she lives in a kind of Pennine village with a view of the hills, and keeps chickens and grows rare dahlias.
Oh, you could have carried that off, sure.
And then she retrained as a midwife, and yeah, it's a load of cock and bull, really. I feel a bit fortunate about it now, but you know, that's what we thought we were going to do, and now I've come out as Maggie Campbell.
It's so weird, though, isn't it? This name thing. It's like, because we're discussing whether I have a different name or not, and it's like partly I don't want to kind of lose what I've gained in my own name, but on the other hand, it seems like they'll probably have a better chance selling it in supermarkets and stuff if it's like a debut. But it's so not a debut. It just seems weird that they don't care whether it's actually a debut.
Well, Paula Hawkins, you know, that was her 4th novel, and she published under a different name before.
Yeah, what was it? She was Amy Silver, wasn't she? When we've seen, you know, there are lots of authors. I don't know how many I can actually name out. You don't want to out them if they're not.
Yeah.
But, you know,
we know who they are.
We know who they are. But if they had said to me, you know, I think because perhaps for me, police procedural to a psychological thriller isn't a huge jump. And in some ways, a couple of my the series books were based on real events, inspired by real events. My background is a journalist, so I've worked, I worked as a journalist for almost 30 years. So I think that's kind of a little bit of a USP that I used to write things that were prompted by the news. So I figured that maybe that's why they just felt, well, with this one, it's not so much of a jump that we need to completely reinvent you. But if they had said, I probably would have, I would have done it. I'd have had so much fun making up a name. Where did Maggie Campbell come from?
Well, my paternal grandmother was called Margaret, right. And I absolutely adored her. Campbell, I decided, my paternal grandmother had Scots roots, so that side, my dad's side of the family are half Irish, half Scots. So Campbell's quite a Scottish name, and I thought that came between Maeve Binchy and Catherine Cookson in the alphabet. My mum was a huge reader. She burned through at least 3 sagas a week. She used to go to the library and just come out with piles like that of all these kind of, ye olde bodice rippers, and she wore clogs going to mill and all this sort of crap. And so I grew up with it. And I think my mum would have absolutely adored Nurse Kitty. I just wish she'd have lived to see that, because it's almost like I've written it for her. But the Maggie Campbell, it's basically an amalgam of my grandmother's and bullshit.
Yeah, I think she sounds like she'd be brilliant on the lawn at Harrogate, though. Maggie Campbell, she'd be up for a laugh.
Well, she'd put talc in her knickers, and she'd be partial to a large sherry.
She'd fit right in to the crime community. I mean, so has there been anything that surprised us about the process of switching? Anything that you just thought, I didn't either thought it was going to be so easy or so hard, or?
Gosh,
I think for me it's been quite hard coming up with a good another voice, because I've written 3 in this Meg Dalton voice, which has become because they're my first 3 books that I wrote. So I've only ever written a book in Meg Dalton's voice, and now I'm having to write it in someone else's voice, and it's sort of also with people saying, "Oh, we love Meg."
Yeah,
So,
I felt guilty when I first started. Yeah. I was cheating on my characters, I just the books were staring down at me at the shelves, and I think, oh, okay, I'm really sorry. And you said, and then you tell people that, when's your next Maggie book? My character's ironically called Maggie, and when's your next Maggie book coming? It's like, oh, actually, I'm writing something different, and they go, oh. Their face.
I don't know.
Yeah, But I found
I've abandoned 2 series, 2 books in. So
you're hard to it.
I mean, the George Mackenzie series, I wrote 5 books, and by The Girl Who Got Revenge, I'd had enough. Yeah. I'd had enough of George. I'd had enough of the series. I felt it was. I was pleased with the story I wrote, but I didn't want to get stale. But with the Manchester Gangland, see, I always write in my own close third person narrative voice. My authorial voice doesn't really change, and I think that I don't see why, I'm telling different stories. I don't see why I should necessarily change that unless I do go to first person. It's like if you look at an author like Chris Whitaker, he writes in a completely different voice to what he's like in real life. He's kind of Mr. Essex, good, incredibly funny, relaxed guy, very irreverent humour. And yet he writes, I don't know if you've seen Ozarks, but he sounds like Ruth Langmore, the kind of young hick, she's a kind of redneck. He writes just like that, and it's an astonishing piece of fiction we begin at the end. But I don't think that I could sustain that, actually. Maybe I could, but I'm not sure I'd want to. I'd find that quite tiring to write in such a different voice for the entire novel. Whereas I like to just change just the cadence of the dialogue and some of the phrasing. I'll change it according to whatever character. So in my Manchester book, Leviticus Bell, who's this kind of young drug dealer, you know, his passages would read differently from, say, Paddy O'Brien, who's like, you know, the kind of kingpin of South Manchester. You know, one's a kind of young mixed race man, one's a white middle-aged man, and you know, they just sound different without me putting on an accent, kind of thing. But I don't think I'd like to go quite as extreme. I don't think I could pull off what Chris Whitaker did.
No, I don't think. I mean, with my character in Shadow of a Doubt, Cara Belling, I mean, she's a similar age to Maggie Neville in my series. I mean, they're very different stories, but yeah, I think I definitely have a voice, which is so. Hopefully, the readers, people that have sort of said you're not writing any more of your series, will kind of find some familiarity. But I also think I'll probably go back to the series at some point. I'd like to. I think it was a subconscious thing when I was writing the 4th book that I kind of knew that I needed to take a break, because I'd finished it. When I started the series, I deliberately only made her 28 because I figured I could get her pregnant. You know, she could. You know, she's got this whole life. And I've actually left it on a bit of a cliffhanger so that I could pick it up 5 years later in her personal life, and she could be doing something. You know, she could still be within the police. Yeah, so do you think could you see yourselves going back to your series, to your first loves?
Well, I've got, at the moment there are 3 more books commissioned in the series.
So your new one is going to be a side project.
It's a sort of extra thing, side issue, yeah, but I'm not very good at writing lots of things at the same time. So whereas some people could probably write a Meg book and the standalone at the same time, I don't seem to be able to do that. So yeah, it's sort of gonna happen, but not immediately. But yeah, I think she will come back in the future. That is the plan.
What about you, Marnie? Would you?
Well, I could definitely write more Bev Saunders, but it depends what happens with this novel that's about to go out on Sub, which my agent's about to send it out. You just can't know. It wouldn't be the first time that I've abandoned a series 2 books in, and that's not to say that I couldn't go back and write more, but was that, you know, did those 2 books perform as well as they could? Would the readership still be there years later? Readers forget very quickly, actually. So although I've got a large readership, especially that loved the George Mackenzie and the Born Bad stuff, you know, there's so many books come out a year that they don't I find they don't kind of religiously say, oh, I'm waiting, you know, I'm not big enough brand for them to say I can't wait for the next Marnie Riches book. So I think at this stage in our careers, it does afford us a bit of flexibility. You know, none of us, I don't think, are Sunday Times bestseller material. You know, we're kind of mid-listers that are well respected for what we've done. We're not Martina Cole or Lee Child or, you know, Peter James, where only a certain thing is expected of us. And I think that's quite freeing, that at this stage of the game, we can chop and change a bit.
Yeah, I think that could be a bit of a trap, really. Especially with me not really intending to write a police procedural in the first place. I sort of slipped into it, and it wasn't actually what I really like reading generally. So it was a bit of an odd thing to end up doing. I never really thought my first book would sell. So in a way, it's quite freeing to be able to say, yeah, I can do something different. Never wants to do that in the first place. But on the other hand, I do love my character, so it's nice to have the options, I suppose.
What sort of things do you guys read?
Well, at the moment, I mean, lately I've just been reading psychological thriller after psychological thriller, because just to sort of immerse myself, to make sure, you know, because there, like you say, there are so many books released and so many really good ones. And I felt that if I was going to jump across, then, you know, I needed to make sure that I could keep up to a standard. So I've been reading most of those because, and ironically, before I did my series, I would always read detective, like Ruth Rendell's Wexford series was my favourite detective series. But I just want to go back to that point you made about Lee Child. That's really interesting when you think about it. Can you imagine if Lee Child suddenly decided to announce one day, I'm going to not write a Jack Reacher? I mean, I know he's retired now, but if he said, I wonder what the reception would have been if he'd gone and decided to write, I'm going to write historical fiction, for example. And
well, the only person who's successfully pulled that off has been J.K. Rowling, because of course she's gone from writing young adult fantasy to she's done the Robert Galbraith stuff. Yeah. But I also think it was quite interesting that she originally intended to publish that under the pseudonym and keep it top secret and let it sink or swim of its own accord. And Casual Vacancy, I think, wasn't that well received, if memory serves, but the Galbraith stuff has done really well, but only because the publisher leaked that it was her. And I think she's the only one who's successfully made that transition, but she keeps her Harry Potter fans happy with Pottermore and the spin-offs.
But she had to come out completely out of her genre. I mean, I think, she's completely, I think, could you ever see yourselves doing that? Could you ever see yourselves not writing crime?
Well, I mean, the historical saga's a complete departure.
So they're not crime related at all?
No. I mean, Nurse Kitty's, in at the birth of the NHS in Park Royal Hospital. I mean, it's a proper.
I just assumed that there was some sort of criminal undertones. That she was,
Well, she has criminals in her family, and I've written it in the same kind of pacey, page-turning way that I would write my crime stuff. But it's mainly about handsome doctors and social issues and nursing, and it's proper saga, high drama, with a touch of romance thrown in. It's not crime at all. It's a complete genre departure, which is why
really,
Campbell and not Marnie.
Really refreshing to just not do. Did you find yourself like almost trying to write murders in, or
I'm sure I would be. I'd be like, someone's got to die.
People do die. It does have. It definitely has a higher proportion of criminality in it than it should. But thinking about it, my narrative voice for that is much stiffer, much older. No, hardly any swearing. I think I say bloody and bastard once in the whole book. And it's much more prim, and because I'm writing for a demographic that's 60 plus, women age 60 plus, I can't write as Marnie Riches. Luckily, I have the this kind of I've internalized my mother to an extent that I can write like that. But I had to really think about the voice. It's like a prim head teacher.
Okay.
I imagine.
My other half just come in doing this because keep an eye on time. Is there anything else we want to cover that we haven't?
I think it's worth saying that I think that more authors should dare to try other things and not be boxed in. Because what you can find is that editors will keep wanting you to write the same thing even when your sales are dwindling, especially if it's a series. And I think that it's your career.
I mean,
and you should put yourself out there.
That was that was pretty much my conversation with my agent. I said, if I carry on writing this series at the moment, I probably, I might go down a hole that I can't get out of. So if I'm going to do it, I need to do it now before I get, before we sign up for any more books in the series. And this seems like a really good time for me to just say, okay, this is my career. This is what I want for it to happen. And you're right. You shouldn't, as authors, we shouldn't be afraid to take control. We're not, this is our lives, it's our livelihood, and we shouldn't be afraid to just turn around and go, actually, this isn't working for me, I'm going to try something else. It's a gamble, but
if you look at Matt Haig dines out on the fact that he won't be pigeonholed in certain genres, so he does equally as well with his children's as with his literary fiction and his kind of almost borderline self-help stuff. I don't know if that's a male thing about having more confidence to say no.
I don't know. I'm really sorry, guys. I'm going to have to cut it there because I have to go and do this. If they want more from us, could we do another little top up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but I
I
think
really enjoyed seeing humans.
Yeah, it's been nice.
humans are that I don't know. You know that
We
aren't.
should have had a drink though. We should have had a glass of wine or something.
Or maybe we could do a top up. But listen, I'll send it to Paddy and see what he thinks. If he wants more, then we give him more. Okay. Take
Cool.
care. All right.
After you.
Bye.
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 Bye.